Hello everyone, I'm Dr. George Bartuska with the Florida Aviation Network. Welcome to Sky Insights. Today we'll be talking about weather impacts on general aviation operations. This is normally a one-day seminar and we've broken it up into three parts. Initially we did structural icing. Last time we did icing protection systems. Today we're going to do winter flying and systems icing. My theme throughout the whole presentation, taken from NASA and AOPA, is there's no such thing as a little ice. Although we tend to think of icing as a winter phenomena, icing can occur anywhere, anytime, in any climate, during any season, during any flight, in moist atmospheric conditions like we have here in Florida, with air temperature as high as 90 degrees Fahrenheit outside air temperature. There's no such thing as a little ice. Icing encounters can be dangerous. Every icing encounter is unique and unpredictable. Different aircraft may react differently to different kinds of icing conditions. Icing-caused accidents usually involve experienced pilots. There's no such thing as a little ice. Now the airlines, they just want to get going as soon as they can get going. They minimize the amount of time they're on the ground after being de-iced and getting their anti-ice systems running. But in the case of general aviation, you, the pilot, have complete responsibility for the go, no-go decision to fly based on your training and the best information available. We need to quote FAR 121.629. No person may take off an aircraft when frost, ice, or snow is adhering to the wings, control surfaces, propellers, engine inlets, or other critical surfaces of the aircraft. As was illustrated in the NAFI Summit in 2023, 1,200 accidents average a year. Of those, 220 are fatal. Weather is a factor in a quarter of all those accidents. However, you can miss every weather question on the FAA exam and still pass, at least at the time this presentation was created. Too many times there are informal discussions like, well, we'll figure it out on the way. Remember, if things don't look right, if you're hesitant, park the plane and take the train. Or when in doubt, sit it out. There are gaps in weather knowledge in the general aviation community. You need to learn the weather before it's too late, and that's one of the reasons we're here. Now, I always quote John and Martha King from the King Schools. They always share this story when they talk in public. They were flying their Cessna 210 in the winter to Sioux Falls. They had a generator failure. They didn't stop to get it looked at. After flying almost 4 hours above the clouds with a dead battery, no radio, it started getting dark. They had to put it down somewhere through a 11,500 foot overcast. They tried 3 times, experienced 3 icing episodes, started to worry about running into a TV antenna. Finally, they broke through the clouds, saw a highway, saw car lights, but saw a lot of power lines. So they ended up in an ice and snow covered cornfield, and luckily they lived. And later on, they found out it was just a loose wire, so if they had stopped, they wouldn't have had to go through any of that. Now, winter weather flying, flight planning. Know the destination forecast. Know what the forecast is where you're going. Know what the forecast is for all your alternate destinations and your contingency routes, for all your plan Bs. Make contact. Call, text, or email someone at those locations and get their perspective on the existing weather conditions and the anticipated forecasts. And utilize all the available weather information from the FAA. Most people are aware with that, and be sure to check the FAA Aviation Weather website. Now, survival is priority 1 in winter flying. You've got to be ready in case you're going to have to put the plane down somewhere in the middle of winter weather. So you want to be prepared to be able to have layered clothing for both your coats and your pants. You need, from the outside, you need breathable, wind, water resistant outer layer with an insulating middle layer and moisture wicking base layer. Besides your comfortable cockpit shoes, make sure you have some boots with moisture wicking lining in your survival kit. Also make sure you have food and water. Hydration, be sure to have a bottle of water in your survival kit along with the other water you bring with, and have food in your, make sure you can have food in your system to help the body retain heat in a cold emergency. You want to make sure you have at least one fully charged cell phone, a flashlight with new batteries and extra batteries, some high energy food like protein bars and nuts, and some states, as we heard earlier today, like Alaska, have a specific requirement for what has to be in that survival kit. And most of us have heard the 6 C's of survival. Number 1, have a cutting tool. Number 2, something to start a fire with. Number 3, something to make a tent, like a tarp. Some kind of container, like from your mess kit. Some kind of cordage, like 7-strand paracord. And in addition to the cell phone, something to communicate with, like a satellite phone, a plastic mirror to serve as a signaling source. Your pre-flight checklist. Check your tires. When it gets cold, the tires are going to drop in pressure. Snow and ice removal. Make sure you have a brush on board and a scraper to handle any snow and ice. Aircraft openings. We're going to talk later about the pitot tube, the static ports, the heater, and the carburetor intakes. Make sure the anti-torque and elevator controls are clear, and the main wheel and tail and nose wheel wells. Make sure they're clear. Now, static pressure ports. The static pressure port is a flush-mounted air inlet on the side of the fuselage. It's situated in an area relatively undisturbed by airflow. For more accurate readings, some aircraft have 2 external pressure ports, one mounted on each side of the fuselage. Make sure during your pre-flight walk-around that you check that static port, that it's not blocked. Fuel tank vents. Make sure the fuel tank, if the fuel tank vent is plugged, it can cause the engine to stop, it can starve the fuel system, and even collapse the fuel tank. And as we talked about last time, if you have anti-ice and de-icing equipment, make sure that it's operable. Winter flying priority number 2, preparation. Engine warm-up and cockpit warm-up. Have a fire extinguisher ready, monitor for or anticipate a faulty heater. Do not leave the aircraft unattended while you're doing cold weather preheating processes. Now, there's no such thing as a little ice. Up to now, we've talked about primarily the flight control surfaces and the wing. Now we're going to talk about everything but the wing. We're going to talk about the carb heat, the pitot heat, and the prop heat. First, I want to mention 2 accidents that show the importance of knowing icing. Air Florida Flight 90, a Boeing 737, in January 13, 1982. The National Transportation Safety Board concluded there was a failure to use engine anti-ice to take off with snow and ice on the airfoil surfaces on the wings, and the limited experience of the flight crew in jet transport winter operations. Then there was Scandinavian Airlines MD-81 crash, 27 December 1991. Clear ice from the tops of the wings was ingested into the engines, causing a rare dual engine flameout. Although the plane broke into 3 pieces before coming to a stop, all 129 passengers and crew survived. The crash was cushioned by the fact the aircraft came down in the tops of trees and then into a snow-covered field. Now, first I want to talk about carburetors. At one time, all planes had carburetors, just like all automobiles had carburetors, and we want to talk about the operation of the carburetor. The carburetor itself has a float bowl, as we see in that picture, and I'm going to hold this up. Here's the carburetor, and I'm taking it apart. Inside here is the float bowl, and there is the floats. Okay. Now, the float bowl has the float maintains a level of liquid in the float bowl, and the next thing is the air inlet. Now, this happens to be an updraft carburetor, so it's mounted like this, and the air comes in from the bottom, but it can be a downdraft, an updraft, a side draft. Aircraft carburetors usually came in all kinds of configurations. And that air inlet has a venturi. And if I pull this off again, you can see right here the venturi. This is the part that's going to create the low pressure so it can suck the fuel out of the float bowl. Next, the throttle valve. The throttle valve is this plate on the top. That's how you're controlling the throttle. When you pull the throttle out on the instrument column, that's what's controlling the RPM of the engine, the throttle valve. And then we have the fuel-air mixture. Once the fuel gets pulled out of the float bowl, flopple and starts to mix with the air, we get a fuel-air mixture that's a blend that goes on to the combustion chambers. Okay. Now, the carburetor induction system can lower the air temperature as much as 60 degrees Fahrenheit. With enough air moisture, ice can form on the inside of the carburetor on the throat walls and the throttle plate, gradually cutting off airflow to the engine. What are the symptoms? A reduction in engine RPM on a fixed-pitch propeller airplane, or a loss of manifold pressure on a constant speed propeller engine, in addition to the rough-running engine. As a review of the Venturi effect, when the flow gets restricted, like in the middle, the velocity will increase, but the pressure will go down. But when the pressure goes down, the temperature also goes down. Now, if water vapor in the air condenses when the carburetor temperature is at or below freezing, ice may form on internal surfaces of the carburetor, including the throttle valve itself, the part you're controlling the RPM with. The reduced air pressure as well as vaporization of fuel contributes to the temperature decrease in the carburetor. Once power loss is noted, immediate action should be taken to eliminate icing already formed in the carburetor and to prevent further ice formation. Applying full carburetor heat will cause the further reduction in power and possibly engine roughness as the melted ice goes through the engine. And here's a little quick schematic that shows that. We're going to show it again here in a minute. Now here's an actual carburetor mounted on an actual aircraft engine. You can see there where the red arrow is, it's an updraft carburetor, and at the top are the intake manifolds going to the cylinders. In the upper right-hand corner, you can see another carburetor mounted with the air screen in front of it, and on the lower right, you can see what the mounting looks like for the carburetor. Now, the carburetor heat system routes hot air into the air induction system, melting any ice and preventing any new ice from forming. Fuel-injected aircraft have no carburetors. What do they have? They have this guy. They have what's known as a throttle body, and if we look in there, we can see that there's no Venturi. There's no Venturi because that's taken over by the fuel injection system, but there's still a throttle body that can ice up. Okay? So an alternate hot air source is included, manual or automatic, that bypasses the air filter and route hot air into the intake system. Carburetor icing related accidents between 2018 and 2023. There were 192 accidents. Of those, 19 were fatal, and/or the cause was the inability to recognize the carb icing symptoms and improper use of the carb heat. They didn't put the carb heat on fast enough. Anytime the outside air temperature is below 70 degrees, you should add some carb heat to prevent carburetor icing. Now let's talk about the pitot tube. The pitot tube is part of the pitot-static system. It's connected to the airspeed indicator, to the vertical speed indicator, and to the altimeter. If the pitot tube or static port becomes blocked by ice, the airspeed indicator will not function properly. The indicated airspeed may freeze or drop to zero. So make sure you have the pitot heat turned on. Icing of the propeller generally makes itself known by a slow loss of power and a gradual onset of engine roughness. The ice first forms on the spinner or propeller dome and then spreads to the blades themselves. Ice customarily accumulates unevenly on the blades, throwing them out of balance. So, for winter operations, just before takeoff, you should have an anti-icing checklist. That means you're going to make sure you have the pitot heat on. If you have windshield heat, make sure that's turned on. And if you have propeller heat, make sure that's turned on. Now, general aviation aircraft often fly at altitudes conducive to atmospheric icing conditions. So remember, aviate, navigate, communicate. If you encounter icing, consider contacting air traffic control and see if you can climb above the clouds if possible, or descend to warmer air if possible, or divert to another location, or turn around to where you came from in the first place, or declare an emergency with air traffic control. Remember, do not stall the aircraft. Make a controlled descent, possibly to an off-field landing. Excuse me, this is the picture I show in all the seminars on icing. This is from the National Weather Service COMET program, weather program. So what it's showing us is if we're low enough and the temperature is warm enough, we're not going to get icing. If we're high enough, like in a corporate jet or an airliner where there's no liquid water, we're not going to have icing. But most icing occurs between 3,000 and 15,000 feet, and that's where most general aviation airplanes are flying, where there's supercooled water that we talked about last time, and we can get clear ice, we can get rough ice, I can't think of the name right now, and mixed icing. Wet snow poses the same hazard as ice. Climb, descend, or divert to get out of that area. So what can a pilot do to avoid or mitigate potential wet snow conditions? Fully comprehend the potential for icing in these conditions, especially when the outside air temperature hovers around freezing and wet snow as possible. Keep in mind that a cloud that can produce snow could also contain supercooled liquid water. So in summarizing, do a good job of pre-flight planning during the winter. Get the weather briefing from the FAA and from the flight service station and from anywhere else you can get weather information to your destination and to your alternatives. Do a significant walk around and fuel check, then do an engine warm up, and then go by your checklist. And remember, regarding carb heat, know the warning signs of carburetor icing for your aircraft. For a fixed pitch propeller, that's a loss of RPM. For a movable propeller, that's a drop in manifold pressure and rough running. Your response to carb heat is to apply carb heat as fast as you can, your response to carb icing. Now as a review, weather is a difficult subject in the flight training curriculum. Weather is a factor in about 1/4 of all aircraft accidents. The presentation emphasized that, quote, there's no such thing as a little ice, unquote. Carburetor heat is used to address carburetor icing. Your winter flying pre-flight checklist should include checking the tire pressure, because cold weather drops the pressure in the tires. Although icing is usually associated with winter flying, icing can occur anywhere, anytime, during any season. Icing-caused accidents usually involved experienced pilots. The responsibility for making the go-no decision to fly in icing condition lies solely with the pilot. The Venturi effect in the carburetor causes reduced pressure and reduced temperature, makes it more susceptible to icing. FAR 121.629 states that no person may take off an aircraft with frost, ice, or snow on the wings, propeller, or control surfaces. Fuel-injected aircraft have no carburetor. However, icing is still a significant hazard for the air induction system and the throttle body. An emergency onboard winter survival kit should include extra coats and pants, boots with moisture wicking lining, and food and water. The flush-mounted air inlet port on the side of the aircraft or both sides of the aircraft is called the static port and must be checked before taking off. A plugged fuel tank vent can stop an engine, can starve the fuel system, and or collapse the fuel tank. The first sign of carburetor icing is typically reduced engine RPM followed by a rough engine. So that's our presentation on icing. Thank you for joining us. This is Dr. George Bartuska with the Florida Aviation Network. I'll see you next time with another weather topic. Now stand by for the number for your wings credit.